Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about how a number of COVID-19 deaths may be going under the radar and why ICMR's guidelines about testing dead bodies have changed over time. We will also talk about allegations of sexual harassment against the Gundecha brothers, two famed gurus of Hindustani classical music. But first, we talk about the India-China border tensions that have been running high over the past 4 months. Though the situation now has further intensified after shots were fired along the border for the first time in 45 years. The last time shots were fired was in 1975 when an Assam Rifles patrol was ambushed by the Chinese in Arunachal Pradesh. Now, the statements made by the two sides about this recent firing and who actually fired the shots differs. In this segment, we talk to Krishn Kaushik, who reports on defense for the Indian Express, about this incident. And he first talks about the Chinese statement about the firing that came in on Monday late night or Tuesday early morning.
China blamed India for firing shots. China said that Indian soldiers had crossed the LAC and they fired warning shots. The Chinese statement actually mentioned that during the operation, the Indian army blatantly fired threats to the patrol personnel of the Chinese border guards who had made representations, and the Chinese border guards were forced to take countermeasures to stabilize the situation on the ground. This is the first statement that came out. The next morning, Indian Army came out with its own statement. They rebutted what China had said. They rejected that Indian troops had crossed the LAC. They even rejected that Indian troops had even fired any shots. They actually blamed the PLA, which is the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army, of firing the shots. It said that India at no stage has transgressed across the LAC or resorted to use of any aggressive means, including firing. Instead, it said that it is the PLA that has been blatantly violating agreements and carrying out aggressive maneuvers while engagement at military, diplomatic, and political level is in progress.
India also blamed PLA troops for closing in on one of their forward positions along the LAC and said that when dissuaded by Indian troops, the PLA fired a few rounds in the air to intimidate the Indian army.
So these are the basic facts. Both sides have accused each other of firing shots. However, the only fact that is there is that yes, shots were fired, which is a worsening of the situation along the LAC, where the standoff has been going on for the past 4 months.
Krishn explains that the protocol of when shots are supposed to be fired come from the 1996 agreement, which is called the confidence building measures in the military field along the line of actual control in India-China border areas, also called the CBM agreement. And the Article 6 of that agreement did mention that neither side shall open fire, cause biodegradation, use hazardous chemicals, conduct blast operations, or hunt with guns or explosives within 2 kilometers from the line of actual control.
However, the CBM agreement of 96, the Article 10, it stated that the agreement will depend upon the two sides arriving at a common understanding of the alignment of the LAC, and the two sides agreed to speed up the process for clarification and confirmation of the LAC. Now, that has not been done till date. So essentially, what should have brought that agreement into force, that element was never executed. However, both sides since then have maintained these protocols and neither side has opened fire. But after June 15, when clashes in Galwan took place, in which India lost 20 troops and China also lost an undeclared number of troops, those were like very close quarters hand-to-hand combat in which Chinese troops apparently used clubs with barbed wire around them and nails and other such weapons. After that, India did tell its troops that the ground commanders are free to use the force that they think is required at the moment. So India has allowed its troops more freedom. Now it's the choice of the ground commanders. Whether they feel that there's an actual threat, then they should be allowed to open fire. But many people claim that if there was actually ever a threat to their lives, troops were always allowed to open fire. It was just that they were following protocol to not use firearms, but because once firearms are used, it can escalate the situation very quickly.
What led to the recent incident is what happened last week in the intervening nights of August 29th and 30th and August 30th and 31st, when India had gone and occupied certain peaks where neither of the troops were deployed earlier.
It is important to understand that on the south bank of Pangong and going further south, it's called the Chushu sector, the LAC follows the watershed principle, which means it is along the ridge lines of a few hills. That's where the LAC is marked, which actually means that the peak of the mountain can be claimed by both sides. So either side of the mountain is on either side of the LAC is with each of the countries. So when Indian troops occupied these positions, they were along the LAC. They haven't crossed the LAC. It gave India an advantage in the sector, and the sector is strategically very important by itself. It gave India a direct view of China's Moldo garrison. It also gave India a dominating position to control the Spangur Gap.
The Spangur Gap is a 2-kilometer wide valley through which Krishn says offenses can be launched. And China, in fact, did use the area to launch an offensive against India in the 1962 war.
If actually Chinese troops can cross this area, they can launch an offensive up till Leh. So that is why the area becomes extremely important, and that's why India has now occupied heights that can dominate the area. Now, Chinese troops were attempting, this is not the first attempt, they have tried multiple times since the last weekend. They are trying to come, they are trying to test the Indian troops' resolve, they're trying to dislodge the Indian troops from these heights so that they can take these positions for themselves. While India did, of course, capture multiple heights, not all of the heights in this region, multiple heights in the region, China also captured certain heights, which gives it a direct view of the Thakung base of India, which is right on the southern bank of Pangong Tso. However, they only have view to one of the bases, while Indian positions, new positions, gives it a dominant position for the entire Spangur Gap or the Trishul sector.
Krishn says that after these recent moves by India and the incident of firing that took place along the LAC, there are many ways in which China can react to this based on its political will.
So one, it can again try to dislodge India from these positions which India has occupied since last weekend. If they do that, it can lead to another similar combat, similar fight to June 15 in Galwan. If that happens, again, the chances of things escalating quickly becomes very, very imminent. The other thing is it can use other kinds of force to dislodge India from its positions, or it can use force in other sectors of the LAC. The point is, any kind of force used from this moment on, it takes the tensions up on the escalation ladder. And where does that lead to is anybody's guess at this point.
There have been multiple attempts in the past 4 months to try and resolve the issue both militarily and diplomatically, but those attempts have failed. And Krishn says that there isn't much known about the attempts to resolve the crisis through political means.
Nothing about what is the political will at the moment is known. But of course, both sides have emphasized multiple times in their statements that both want a peaceful resolution to this. Defense ministers of India and China, they met in Moscow last week. Nothing came out of that. They both actually basically repeated the same things that the military commanders and the diplomats have been talking to each other about. India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar is likely to meet China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi over the next few days again in Moscow, where he's gone for the meeting of the Shanghai Coordination Organization. Again, little might be expected of that because the decision now has to be taken at the apex political level, which is about whether Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping, they can have a conversation or they can tell their own respective sides that this is now time to ease the situation and it's time to pull back the troops and start disengagement and then de-escalation.
Dear listeners, sorry for this interruption, but before we move on to the rest of the show, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on 3 Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. And next we talk about COVID-19 deaths. Earlier this week, Tabassum Banagarwala, who reports on health in Bombay for the newspaper, did a story that highlights the problem in the way COVID-19 deaths are counted in the country and why the death toll due to the virus might be much higher than what the numbers reveal. Through data assessed from the Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation or BMC, Tabassum looked at all the deaths that have taken place this year in Mumbai and compared it to the deaths that had taken place last year in the same period. And turns out there was a huge difference, even if we were to account for the COVID-19 deaths.
See, when we got the data, we were completely shocked because we were not expecting such high fatalities that we saw, especially during May and June.
That's Tabassum, and we spoke to her about what exactly this data revealed.
So if I speak about the data, this year from January until July end, there were 64,349 people who had died in Mumbai. And this data is expected to further rise as more death registration is recorded by the BMC. If we compare this data with the last year, there's a huge difference, especially in the months of May and June. There have been some 8,000 more deaths in May this year as compared to 2019, and some 5,000 more deaths in June as compared to 2019 June. These 2 months are also the 2 months that Mumbai was at its peak of COVID-19 pandemic. So if you want to draw a clear link, the pandemic has been directly related to the fatalities.
Tabassum says that the BMC is attributing different factors to this rise in deaths, especially since the pandemic began. One thing they say is that during this period, a lot of the health infrastructure was dedicated to treating COVID patients, and a lot of non-COVID patients didn't get the care they should have, thereby increasing the non-COVID deaths. The other reason they cite is that during this period, a lot of COVID patients from nearby Mumbai, like Thane, Navi Mumbai, and Palghar, came to the city for hospitalization seeking better healthcare facilities, and their deaths got counted in the Mumbai death toll. But besides these two reasons that BMC cites, Tabassum says that they found something interesting when they looked at the data.
We found that the railway deaths and the road accident deaths had actually reduced from last year because there was a complete lockdown and the transport system was shut. So on an average, Mumbai recorded 8 deaths per day. And that came down by 1/4 this year from March till July. So fatalities due to road accidents and railway accidents declined. And the fatalities due to COVID-19 related problems increased. There are a lot of things that now need to be evaluated. The BMC is going to sit with this data and it's going to start analyzing causes of death and why there was a spike in May. 8,000 is a huge figure. A lot of officials told me that even during the H1N1 pandemic, Mumbai did not record such a high fatality. So 14,000 is the highest for any month in Mumbai in the last 1 decade.
So, considering Mumbai's COVID-19 deaths and the fact that deaths in tracks and in road accidents decreased, the number of overall deaths, Tabassum says, definitely remains high.
This data is quite worrying for government officials also, and they should start investigating into the deaths and why these deaths are happening. If we are missing out on COVID-19 deaths, for example, if in May last year there were 6,832 people who died, and this year there were 14,000 people who died, but the corresponding COVID deaths were just 1,000 in that month, then the government needs to really sit down and understand why these deaths have increased and what are the factors behind it.
One possibility health experts pointed out to Tabassum was that certain COVID-19 deaths may have gone under the radar because of the way dead bodies are tested for COVID-19, especially since the central guideline about this has changed over time.
Initially, there were no guidelines on testing dead bodies. Then, in the month of May, the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, decided to ask all its hospitals to test dead bodies for COVID-19. The primary reason behind this was to have accuracy in recording data so that they don't miss even a single case or even a single death of COVID-19. But what started happening that these bodies were being brought to the hospital, a swab was taken, and these bodies were stored in the mortuary. And then it would take 24 hours to 48 hours for the results to come. So until then, the body had to be stored in the morgue because the whole system of cremation or burial of a COVID-19 dead body is completely different. It is as per infectious protocol. And for a non-COVID body, you don't need to follow all those protocols. So until they knew the result, they could not do the final rites of these bodies. A lot of families started complaining in cities like Mumbai, Delhi, where a lot of fatalities were being recorded of COVID-19. Families of patients were having complaints that, we need the body to do the final rites. And the mortuaries were also getting overburdened because they had to store a lot of dead bodies. By June, the ICMR withdrew these guidelines and they did not make it compulsory anymore for hospitals to test dead bodies. Ever since then, most of the states have stopped this practice.
For example, states like Delhi and Gujarat are not doing it. Some other states like Punjab, Chhattisgarh, and Uttar Pradesh are doing it only if the person was a suspected COVID-19 patient or if the family insists on it. While in some other areas in West Bengal, if the deceased was a suspected COVID-19 patient, then they don't conduct a test.
It serves them 2-3 purposes. One, their resources for testing are being utilized for active positive cases who are alive. And second, they don't have to waste the whole time and human resources on testing a dead body and then following the protocol of burying it. Unfortunately, this has affected the data accuracy because COVID deaths, which would have otherwise been recorded, are now not getting recorded anymore.
Because ICMR's guidelines no longer mandate it, whether or not a body is tested can vary even within states. Let's take the example of Himachal Pradesh, where in Shimla, all dead bodies are reportedly being tested. But in Chamba, at the other end of the state, only dead bodies which are suspected of COVID-19 are being tested. Same is the case in Maharashtra.
Until last month, Jalgaon, which was having a huge fatality rate, it was one of the highest in India actually. It was at 12%. They were testing all their dead bodies. Their main aim behind this was that if there is one positive dead body, there might be an entire family related to the dead person who might be positive and they might start spreading. So they wanted to break the chain and they wanted to identify and isolate as many cases as possible. But as the death rate started climbing, even Jalgaon has now stopped testing its dead bodies for COVID-19. So from districts to different districts, they take their own call. And most of them are not testing dead bodies as of now. There are few states which are testing, but not all.
One of these few states is Kerala, where all dead bodies are being tested. But in other states where this doesn't happen, another problem is the one that families have to face when it comes to funerals. Because in a COVID-19 funeral, only 3 to 4 family members are allowed to attend it.
Now, funerals hold a sentimental value in the Indian society, and people want their family to be part of the funeral. They want to bid their last farewell. And if a dead body is COVID positive, then all those chances are eliminated. So there's also a lot of pressure on government hospitals. Sometimes we have heard cases from KEM and Nair Hospital that they've been requested to not write suspected death in the death certificate or confirmed COVID death because then the whole funeral procedure will change. So there's also that pressure, although the number would be really small because most of those deaths are recorded as COVID-19 if there is a COVID-19 positive report. But there are few cases where there are suspected deaths not tested for COVID-19 and the family insists on not stating it as a COVID death. There's also a lot of social stigma involved. The flip side of this is also that there is an effort by the government to also bring down the official narrative of COVID-19. India overall has a really low death rate as compared to other countries. And frankly speaking, we do not have first class infrastructure that we will beat USA in terms of treatment. So if India has a really low death rate, then it should be questioned why this death rate is low and whether all the deaths are being recorded. One major problem with India is the way it records its death. We do not have a great database on causes of death, on death certificate, on post-mortem. And I think there needs to be a push in this direction now so that there could be enough data to make accurate policy decisions.
And in the end, we talk about the allegations of sexual harassment against 2 famed gurus of Hindustani classical music, Ramakant Gundecha and Akhilesh Gundecha, both brothers. The allegations first surfaced via a Facebook post which accused them of harassing students for years. The brothers are musicians based in Bhopal. To talk about their case, Suanshu Khurana, who writes on music and performing arts for the newspaper, joins us. And she first talks about Drupad, the genre in Hindustani classical music that they practice.
It is a style of rendering a particular raga under a very rigid composition and rhythm structure. So it's a slow meditative form that emerged perhaps in the 12th century. And the Dagar family, that's been the guardian of the tradition for a very long time. This is the family that taught the Gundechas this art form.
The Gundecha brothers being talked about here are Ramakant Gundecha, one of the accused, and Umakant Gundecha. They are the ones that first learned from the Dagar family and began to perform 4 years later.
So the Gundecha brothers would subsequently become a force to reckon with in the world of the rare art form. The two were awarded Padma Shri in 2012 and the Sangeet Natak Academy Award in 2017. While the meditative and leisurely pace of the music has sort of caused it to lose takers in India in the last few years, it has seen a revival due to the efforts of the Dagar family, people like Uday Bhavalkar and even the Gundechas. However, its most dedicated audience remains in Europe, where Drupad concerts are held regularly.
Umakant Gundecha heads the prestigious Drupad Sansthan in Bhopal, a musical gurukul with accreditation to UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage Committee. Most of the students at the Drupad Sansthan are in fact European. It is also important to note that Ramakant Gundecha, one of the accused, died last year. His other brother, brother number 3 Akhilesh, who is the other accused, has accompanied both of them over the years along with other famous musicians. The allegations against Ramakant and Akhilesh first surfaced last month in a Facebook group titled Drupad Family Group Europe.
It was sort of an email that was circulated around among students of the musicians highlighting alleged harassment from two gurus. So there is mention of Ramakant and there is mention of Akhilesh, the second brother and the third brother. So there is an Amsterdam based yoga teacher who put up the post and wrote that she was doing it on behalf of a friend who wanted to remain anonymous. The post said that this harassment has been going on for years with the students who stay in the gurukul. So basically this is a residential gurukul. Students come from all over the world and stay there at the Drupad Sansthan. And it opened in 2004 and was inaugurated by Pandit Bhim Singh Joshi and has been associated with a lot of big names. So students basically come and live there, and they've come from all over the world. So this post was probably put up by people who came from Europe because that's the group. And it said that it was going on for very long and that their testimony is necessary as other girls and women will fall prey to the one alive person out of the two, which is Akhilesh, and it is their duty to protect the next potential victims.
Suanshu points out that back in 2018, during the Me Too movement, names of a lot of gurus from the Carnatic classical music scene had surfaced, but nothing from the Hindustani classical world, which is much more tightly knit. To know more about the case, Suanshu spoke to one of the victims involved.
It's been a little difficult because no one wants to come on record about these things, but she sort of was brave enough to talk. And this woman's experience was with Akhilesh. She left the institute after being there for a couple of months. She told the Express that he would keep speaking to her and keep talking to her about her looks and that how lonely he was, and that she ignored it for a while because she considered him an elderly person, father figure. She told him that she was there to learn music with sort of pure intentions, and he would keep sending her texts. Then she confronted him once, and he said that it wasn't his fault and that he couldn't help himself because of how she looked. She also spoke about being uncomfortable in one on one sessions and that he'd sit really close to his female students and sometimes even behind them, hold their hands. And she spoke about how inappropriate it was and how she felt really uncomfortable. She also claimed that a couple of students had confronted Akhilesh once, but he was reportedly unfazed, telling him that you do whatever you want, you go to the press if that's required, but nothing will happen to me.
In the initial Facebook post, there are more such allegations about Ramakant and Akhilesh, about how many students were sexually propositioned, touched inappropriately, and told to give in if they, quote, ever wanted to have a career in music, unquote. Suanshu says that the reactions of those in the music community have been mixed. Some have been shocked that this went on for this long, while others aren't really surprised, saying that the whispers about this were there. Students had mentioned it, but things were brushed under the carpet. The allegations have also led many to question the Guru Shishya Parampara, the teacher-student tradition in classical music, which inherently comes with a difference in the power dynamic.
And this depends completely on the surrender to the teacher. And this lonely, introspective sort of practice of the form, the grammar involving concepts of thought process and very complex systems, these are learned orally over many repetitions from the guru. So this is not learned from textbooks. So that's the basis of it. So you need a guru and the knowledge to understand it. And it has happened beautifully over many years. But there is no doubt about the fact that the power dynamic, the power structure is very off here. So what does full surrender mean? So I think in this case, a guru can feel that he can just do anything. And I think this is what has happened here. This case of sexual harassment, and I'm pretty sure that it has happened in the past as well, but not talked about as much. So the guru once, sort of loomed large over the shishya's life. He's unquestioned, he's omnipotent, teaching by imparting knowledge beyond the art form itself, and all knowledge, including about music, was transmitted when the time was right. So the whole mystery angle to it, in the whole Guru Shishya Parampara, for example, we've heard those stories about Pandit Bhimsen Joshi washing Savai Gandharva's clothes, his guru's clothes, before sitting in a section. Then Ustad Alauddin Khan, beating his son up if he didn't get his tan right. I mean, son was also the student. And Aladia Khan putting conditions, on Kesavai Kerkar if she had to learn. Like she had to learn for 10 years if she had to learn. She couldn't stop in the middle. So there have been eccentricities which have been known in the past, which people have sort of gone through. But the sexual harassment is a case in Hindustani. I think it's one of the rare times that it has come forward like this.
After the allegations came out, the Drupad Sansthan put out a statement that they are forming an internal committee to look into the matter, which Suanshu points out that they already should have had, since every organization with more than 5 people is required to do so. The internal committee, however, has now been instituted.
It has 4 names. One is Sushma Iyengar, who studied at the Drupad Sansthan and has been a student of the Gundechas. There's Mona Dikshit, who is wife of Sandeep Dikshit, son of Sheila Dikshit, and has been known to be a huge fan of the Gundecha brothers. Then there's Anshu Vaish, an IAS officer who's retired and has been close to them and the Sansthan. And then there's Munshi Singh Chandrawat. He's a district and sessions court judge of MP, who also retired recently. Now, the notable thing here is that Ajay Kumar Taylor is their brother-in-law, who's at this point a serving district judge in MP. So these two have served at the same time, and it will be surprising if they don't know each other. So the internal committee seems a bit on the side of people who are their friends. It shows that it's external. I mean, that people are from outside, but in reality, it doesn't seem to be true. So we'll have to see how this committee works. If more victims are going to come forward, the case, this whole situation with the Gundechas is evolving, and we'll have to see where it goes with this.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and as always was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain section. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.